Welcome back to The Conversation Continues with Professor Adam Galinsky. So many great questions came in and we want to get to as many of those as possible. Good?
Yes.
All right, let's do it. All right.
More.
First one came in, and I think I've been seeing this question come into a lot of our webinars, so let's talk about it. You mentioned there are universals, but are there gender differences?
It's a really great question. So I think there's two different parts to that question. The first question is, when I ask people to think about inspiring leader and to write down the trait or characteristic or the way they were in the world that inspired them, we can look at the gender of the person who describes an inspiring leader, and we can also look at the gender of the person who is being described as inspiring. And it turns out there's no difference between those. So there's no real differences between both men and women find the same elements inspiring, and the same elements within men and women are found inspiring by others. However, there's a whole other line of research that suggests that women are held to a higher standard than men, and that stereotypes about women can actually lead to certain behaviors to be judged more harshly than they are for men. So just to give you two examples, is that women, to be seen as competent, have to have higher qualifications and higher credentials than a man does. So it is true that highly competent men and highly competent women are inspiring, but the standard or the threshold to be called competent or even super competent is higher for women. The second thing is that because of some stereotypes about women is that sometimes exposing, let's say, vulnerability can confirm some stereotypes about women, not necessarily they're not accurate, but just the stereotypes about women, and therefore that might undermine, let's say, their competence if they expose some vulnerability. And so for those reasons, they have higher threshold and these sort of stereotypes that reduce some of the behaviors to less positive evaluations. Women often face this double bind. And so at one level, there's no gender differences. Both men and women find the same dimensions inspiring, and men and women who are described as inspiring have the same dimensions. But what leads you to be seen as having those dimensions does seem to vary about gender, with women having higher thresholds and standards and suffering from some of the negative stereotypes that are placed on them as a burden.
Right. Very interesting. All right, so the next one is really on the topic of scarcity. So how can I motivate someone if we have a clear mission and vision, but we lack the financial return on a way we are not available to provide them big paychecks, bonuses, etc.?
Sure. I mean, we have actually a really nice naturally occurring experiment that exists in the world, which is people working for-profit companies that provide lots of bonuses, and people working for nonprofit companies which don't provide a lot of bonuses and as much sort of financial well-being, as you will. And the research is very clear that to the extent that financial resources are limited, you need to infuse that vision with even more meaning and purpose. People are willing to sacrifice money for meaning and purpose. And so it becomes even more incumbent upon you to really work on being that visionary person. The second thing is, again, don't be a hypocrite. If you're not going to be able to give other people bonuses, you can't look like that you're receiving a lot of resources yourself. And so part of that, if resources are scarce, you need to suffer the same scarcity of others and infuse your vision with even more meaning and purpose.
And I would think that's where the vulnerability steps in,
Yeah.
because that's when you talked about the shared experience. You can't have a shared experience if there's no vulnerability.
Right, and
otherwise it's just assigning work.
And if you're not willing to suffer the same slings and arrows, then you're not going to have that shared experience.
Exactly.
But sometimes, if something's late for a client and people are going to have to pull all-nighters, there's nothing more inspiring than the leader pulling the all-nighter with the fellow members of their team.
Yeah, the proverbial in the trenches.
Yes,
yeah, exactly.
That's
All right.
a great phrase.
Next question. How do you engage with an insecure manager who has no systems built in for feedback?
That's a great question. The research is very clear on what allows people to process critical feedback about themselves. And people process critical feedback about themselves when they feel secure. Now, we see a problem. If your manager is insecure, it makes it more difficult for that person to be able to tolerate that feedback because it's so overwhelming for them. So what I would say is that the single most important thing you can do is to find ways to make that person feel more secure, to maybe bend over backwards to show them a little bit more respect, to make them feel pretty convinced that you admire them and trust them and think that they have your best intentions. Because if that person believes that you, someone with less power, do believe in them and trust them and respect them and accord them status, they will be more accepting of it. The second thing is not to make it about them, but to make it about you. Talk about what will help you do better if they do maybe things a little differently. So it's not about what they're doing wrong, it's what's going to help you be more successful.
Yeah, that's great advice. All right, the last two questions here, I'm going to combine them because I think they're following a general theme. First part of it is, what holds most people back from becoming an inspiring leader, and what do you recommend for leaders who are scared of stepping into their true power? It's a very emotional.
Yeah. It's funny because as soon as he asked the first question, I would say, well, the thing that holds people back is fear.
Yeah.
And then the second question is,
Yeah,
what if you're
exactly.
scared?
Yep.
So, I mean, I think there's a lot of fear that people experience in thinking about becoming a leader, the fear of the responsibility, of not having the skills and talents, et cetera. So one of the things I think it's really important for you is to try to find that encourager, that one person that can encourage you, that can really help you be convinced of your potential. The second thing is that it's still, you have control over your own behavior, as I said earlier. You can control how much time and effort you put into being visionary, how much you practice being calm even in a crisis, how much you take time out of your day to think about how your behavior is affecting other people. So part of it is really about those things that you can control. And if you can control your behavior effectively, if you can self-regulate on these inspiring dimensions, people will then feel more comfortable giving you leadership positions, and you're going to be more capable of fulfilling them.
Great. Adam, this has been great
Thanks so
information.
much.
It was so great working
Yep.
with you again. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for The Conversation Continues with Professor Adam Galinsky.